realize it's a little bit late in the month of January to get started with this, but here we are. When I sketch out a gnome, I usually start with the nose and then I will lay the hat right on top of that. So that's what you see me doing here. And then from there, I will sketch out where I want the beard to fall, and then the body and arms and feet from there. If you follow me over on Instagram, you've probably seen some of the other gnomes that I've posted and know that it's not, I'm not the best at drawing them, but it's fun for me. So I thought that this challenge would maybe give me a way to improve my skills a little bit. For January, my birthday falls in the month of January, as does my mom's and a cousin of mine, so I added a little balloon to mine for a little bit of a birthday celebration, or it could be for New Year's, or you could draw something else there if you wanted to, if you try to paint this gnome along with me. And then here I'm adding his arms along with some mittens for hands. I could have done a little bit better job of trying to make it look like he was actually holding the balloon, but here we are. I have been painting with watercolors now for probably off and on 4 to 5 years, I would say. I do also work a full-time job, so depending on what's going on in that world, sometimes I take longer breaks from it than maybe I would like to, but I'm not the best at sketching things out before I go, but I have also learned that I have better results if I do try to sketch things out. So this has given me a little bit of a challenge for myself also to improve those skills somewhat. And then I'll go back with a kneaded eraser and lighten up those lines, because if you try to paint over the top of your pencil lines and you use a light shade or a light wash of color, you're not able to erase those lines underneath. So that's why I try to make sure those lines are as light as possible. This paper that I'm using is the Master's Touch Premium from Hobby Lobby. It is not 100% cotton paper, but for the style of painting that I do, and again, because it's just about fun for me, it works okay. It is one of the papers where your pigment or your paint stays a little bit more on top of the surface rather than soaking down into it, and you'll see a little bit of where that comes into play a little bit later. But this one also does tend to stay wet longer than, say, Canson XL paper. For me, it works a little bit better, and I find I like it better than just the lowest grade Canson paper that I started out with. Here I'm using an indigo for the feet or the boots. I should have gone with a little bit lighter wash here to start with so I could add highlights and build from there. But as I mentioned, this paint will sit on top of the paper a little bit more. So even after it's dry, it's a little bit easier with this paper to go back and re-wet and lift some of that color, which you'll see me do a little bit later on in the video. And then here I'm using a little bit of a pink shade to paint in the balloon and fill that in. Again, watercolor for me is a way for me to relax and sort of de-stress from my day. So I will spend an inordinate amount of time sometimes on the smallest, most minute details, even though it's a painting that will probably just get placed in a box somewhere and not really be displayed anywhere. But for me, it's about the process. It's about the, half hour or so that I spend putting paint to paper and just letting go of the stress of the day. So I try to really take my time and be mindful about what I'm doing. I've also edited out a good portion of this video where I'm just sort of sitting there trying to decide what color I should paint something or which part should come next, because I don't tend to sketch out my designs or have a really well thought out plan in place ahead of time. And that's just the way that I tend to do things, at least right now. Maybe that will evolve over time as I try to be more mindful and spend some more time on painting and letting myself have that time, I guess. I'm using a little bit of a periwinkle shade, a mix of blues and purples for the mittens on this guy. When I think January here in the Midwest is usually pretty cold, so that brings to mind shades of blue and purples. I don't know why, it's just what's always in my mind. Part of the reason that I skip kind of back and forth between details is I don't want to paint one detail next to another if an area is still wet, to keep it from bleeding into it. So for instance, I didn't start on the hat until I made sure that the nose portion is really dry. Here's where I'm going back and adding a little bit of just clean water on my brush to try to add some highlight to the boots, and then here dabbing it with a paper towel and then realizing I picked up a little too much pigment and adding some back to that to sort of even that out and make it look a little bit more like the other side. Here I'm taking some of that gray from this palette, bringing it over to the pan and adding in various different shades of indigo and a little bit of black, maybe to alter that hue of the gray just a little bit, but I want to start with a lighter wash. And so again, just starting out with a thinner consistency, really light wash of that gray for the beard, just to get an idea of where everything lies. And then you'll see me go back and add varying shades in different areas just to keep it from looking sort of flat there. Again, with this paper, since your paint lies on top of the page a little bit more, you do have to be a little bit more careful around areas where you've already painted, even if it's dry, just to keep it from reactivating and bleeding into your painting. If you're using 100% cotton paper, it's not something that I find as noticeable or that you really have to deal with that higher quality paper. So I'll just go back in with various different shades of the grays and add some sort of sketchy marks and make sure that I add a little bit of detail towards the bottom or the outside of the beard, so it's not just sort of a triangle shape, but it does look like a little bit more of a hair pattern towards the bottom. And then here, just darkening it up a little bit. And spreading that paint out across the entirety of this little section here. The brush that I'm using for this painting up until this point, or up through this point at least, is the Princeton Heritage, and I believe that's a size 4 that I'm using. You will see me switch to a different brush later on, but the Princeton Heritage series is definitely some of my favorites. I probably tend to spend a little bit more money on brushes than other details. Again, the paper is a very, very important aspect when it comes to watercolor, and finding the paper that works for you and the style of painting that you do is an important factor. I've tested out a variety of different papers, and there's good and bad in all of them, and they all sort of serve their own purpose. In the beginning, start with what you can afford and start with what you have access to and learn it. And then you can move on from there. So adding a little bit more color to the mittens just to make that a little bit darker. And then adding some, making sure I've got the gray up to the line of that nose. And then I mixed a little bit of a couple of different shades of blue and some purple here for the body. Start out with one idea, and as I start mixing colors together, it goes in a very different direction. But I'm okay with that, because again, we're just having fun. So once I've made sure that the mittens are dry, then I'm painting the arms there that little bit lighter of a kind of a periwinkle shade. Another thing that you'll notice if you watch any of my videos very much either here or over on TikTok, I do tend to turn my paper around a lot, just trying to get the best angle that works for me. And that's, again, going to be a very individualized part of your artwork and finding what works best for you. It took me some time in getting started and having watched a lot of different art videos on YouTube and TikTok and things of that nature, and seeing people that, you know, realistically have been painting for years and have a well-developed style and consistency and things that work for them, and being able to create what turns out to be an amazing piece of art in a very short amount of time. So for a long time, I had in my head that I had to, when I sat down to paint, I had to, one, finish the project then in one sitting, and two, that I should be able to, you know, follow this tutorial and paint this fabulous painting in the same time that the artist is painting it in front of me. And that's just not a realistic goal, especially in the beginning. For me, again, I'm doing a voiceover after the fact, so there's a lot of part of this video that it has been edited out where I'm either just trying to think about my next step or having to stop and let an area dry because I wasn't using any sort of heat tool or anything like that to dry this piece, not because it's something that I'm against, just because I didn't have it handy right in front of me. And sometimes you have to stop and go do something else, or you know, life gets interrupts you for a moment. And it took me a while to get past that and to be okay with it. And so just know that if that's something that you struggle with as well, that it's okay. It's okay to take your time and to leave and come back to it and do what works for you. So just adding various different shades again of that blue to give a little bit more of a visual detail and different values to the color there, so that it doesn't look like just a flat wash. I like the variation there in the shading, and just being really careful again around that beard to try not to reactivate that gray. For the hat, I am using a handmade watercolor in sort of a glitter metallic shade. I'll link all of that information down below in case you want to check it out. This one is a really gorgeous shade called Oasis, and that one is from Hydrocolor. But again, I'll link that all down below in the description. One of the things that is really important with some of these metallic or glitter shades, especially in the handmade watercolors, is that you do need to let the water sit on your paint a little bit longer. You know, add a few drops of water to your paint there and just let that sit for at least a minute or two to let that water really soak in and let that paint reactivate. Most of these metallic shades, of course, also look their best over black paper. You can also go over a section of your painting there with a black Sharpie or another sort of black marker. Just make sure that it's one that's not gonna reactivate with water and mix with your paint. But that will give you a little bit of a different look to it as well. I also tend to have 2 separate dishes of water when I'm using this type of paint so that I can make sure that I rinse the glitter off of my brush and keep it out of the other paints. I just love to watch the sparkle dance across the paper there, though. It's such a mesmerizing, just beautiful color. So I'm just trying to sort of get an even wash of that shade on there. And then, as I said, I mentioned earlier, I have a little dish of water there that you can see. And then there's another one just out of frame above where I rinsed my brush a second time before I go into the palette there and start adding some details back to the beard now that it's dry. So that what I just did was laid down some of a darker shade and then rinsed my brush and went back in with just some water on it to sort of spread that pigment out a little bit to add some shadow behind, and then I'll go back in with this brush and also a finer detail brush to add some more just little lines to make it look a little bit more like varying shades of a beard color. Here switching to more of a liner brush. This one is from Hobby Lobby. Again, it's the Master's Touch series. This one I like because it has a thicker handle, so it's a little bit easier to hold on to. A lot of the really fine detail brushes have a very small handle, and it's a little bit harder to hold on to. So I like that about this one, that it has a little bit of a thicker handle that's a little bit easier to grip. So just adding some lines that are going in various different directions just to add some detail there to the beard, and using different shades of black mixed with that gray and indigo to give it some varying shades there. Really kind of focusing on those areas toward the bottom and the outside edges of the beard there. And then picking up some of that darker periwinkle and purple, and I decided to add some stripes on the arms to sort of pull together the color of the mittens and the color for the rest of the body. And just another little detail. Using another handmade paint, which again I'll link below in the description. This one is a sort of silver glitter, but it doesn't show up really well in the video here, but it's gorgeous in real life, sort of a hollow silver glitter, making a snowflake on the front of his shirt there for January. If you guys have suggestions or things that you'd like to see for the gnome for February, leave them below in the description and we'll see what we can come up with. If you're not already subscribed, I would love if you'd subscribe and follow along through this journey. Leave me other suggestions of things that you'd like to see a beginner watercolor artist attempt to paint, and let me know your thoughts. Sort of finishing up the detailing here, I'll take a little bit of that blue and just add a little bit of a shadow on the underneath side of the arm on both sides, and then grabbing just a micron pen to add in the string of that balloon as the final detail. And I try to also sign each piece so that I can go back and see where I have improved over time. And let me know if you'd like to see a video that shows some of my previous works and progress up until this point. Again, I'd love if you would subscribe if you're not already and give this a like. Thanks so much for following along, everyone. Till next time.